Hi, Year 7. If you haven't yet met me at this stage in your induction week, then my name's Mrs. Machin. I'm one of the assistant heads here at Fram. We're obviously delighted that you're here with us, and I hope you're enjoying your induction week activities so far in these first few days. I'm going to talk to you today about two things: silence and listening. And I know you probably think, well, I know what silence and listening are, but we think they're both really important at Fram, and this session will help you to understand a little bit more about why and your role in that. But also, I hope it's an opportunity just for you to do a couple of activities and just to think a bit more about these two things that we sometimes take for granted and sometimes don't do particularly well. So to begin, all I'm going to ask you to do, your tutors I'm sure will pause this video for a moment or two to allow you the time to do it, is just on a piece of paper, write down any words that come to mind when you hear the term silence. So that could be feelings, how it makes you feel. It could be situations or times where you remember that you were silent, or it could just be other words that you associate with the idea. Okay, so just have some time now to write down as much as you can. So hopefully you did that. And I wonder whether you had any words on your piece of paper that might be negative. So I wonder if anybody had words like punishment, or if anybody thought about a time when maybe your class or your group of people that you were with got a bit noisy and your teacher says, right, we're too noisy, we've got to all be silent. And maybe, you associate it with it being told off or something that is as a punishment. Well, we don't view it as a punishment here at Fram. Actually, we view it more as a gift. We're giving the opportunity for you to really think hard and think deeply and to concentrate. And we're promising, when we have silence in our classrooms, we're promising you that you won't be disturbed. You won't be disturbed by your teacher interrupting. You won't be disturbed by any of your fellow students. And that really is an opportunity that we think is important. So, of course, in your lessons, there will be many times for talking to each other, sharing ideas, whole class discussions, answering questions. But what you will see, and you'll realise this very, very quickly, is that there are certain parts of the lesson where your teacher will ask you for silence. Or I should say, maybe they will give you silence. And it's really important that we all respect that. So I found a few quotes when I was thinking about this idea of silence and the importance of it. And I thought I'd just share them with you. So our first one there, a proverb: open your mouth only if what you're going to say is more beautiful than the silence. And I like that. I like that you have to think before you speak. But I also like the fact that it's referring to silence as beautiful. And I personally think it is. It's not very often we get to experience true silence. I think about when I've been on a camping trip, and if I wake up in the middle of the night and there's no movement and there's no rustling and there's no owl outside the tent, and you can't, every so often you'll just get maybe only a few seconds, but you'll get absolute silence. And it is quite beautiful, it's quite powerful. The quieter you become, the more able you are to hear. That one we might come back to, because that's going to be quite important when we think about listening. Now, I'm not sure I agree with this next one by Pythagoras. A fool is known by his speech and a wise man by silence. I'm not sure I agree, because I think very often when we speak, we can say some really knowledgeable things and some wonderful things. So I'm not sure that I would always consider that somebody is foolish through their speech. But I think what Pythagoras is getting at is that it's often wise to pause, to process what we've heard before we blurt something out. And often that involves being silent. And I think that probably does apply in our classrooms as well. And that one at the bottom, silence is more musical than any song. I think you can interpret that in your own way and draw some meaning from that yourselves. So what I'm going to ask you to do is talk to your partner and decide which one of those you agree with the most and why. Now, this is where I'm going to have to ask you to do something a bit differently. Normally, when we say turn and talk to your partner, We want you to use those good listening skills and physically turn and sort of lean in and talk to them and look at them when they're talking. Because of this situation that we're in, and we're trying to ensure that everybody stays really, really safe, in this instance, I don't want you to lean forwards, and I don't want you to look directly at them when they're talking, because we know that the safest thing to do is to face the front. So just while we're in this kind of different time, I'm going to ask you to not look directly at the person who you're talking to. But you can still have a valuable quality conversation. So have your tutor can pause the video, have 30 seconds to tell each other which of those quotes you agree with the most and why. Okay, now depending on the order of induction activities that your tutor group is doing, you may or may not have seen this. This is our school ethos statement, and it's very, very important to us as a school, and therefore you'll see it in lots of different places. You'll see it around the school, you'll see it in your planner, you'll certainly hear your teachers and your tutor refer to different elements of it, and it comes through our assemblies as well. And what I'm going to ask you to do is have a look at this, and maybe as a tutor group, you could have a discussion around this. Which bits of that ethos statement do you think suggest that we should be silent in lessons when others are thinking and working? So I've already said there's times in our lesson where our teacher will say to us, okay, we're going to do this in silence. What is it in our ethos statement that suggests that that's important and that that is right? So have a little bit of thinking time, and then maybe as a tutor group have a discussion around that. And I hope you had a good discussion, and I hope you drew out lots of the different important words in that ethos statement. These are the ones that I think link to the importance of silence in our lessons, the ones that I've highlighted there. Our school promotes academic excellence and embraces the shared values of honesty, integrity, respect, and compassion. Now, I've highlighted academic excellence because unless we can think hard, and the best conditions for thinking hard and working hard are in silence, and unless we can really listen and concentrate on all of that new knowledge that's being shared, we're not going to be able to achieve that excellence, that academic excellence that we talk about. But the main words I've highlighted, respect, compassion, kind or kindness, I think that's what it's about, because I think it's actually really unkind, and I think it's not compassionate to talk, to distract others when they're being asked to think really hard. So, for example, in our lessons always begin the first 5 minutes by our teachers asking us to complete a retrieval task. And that's where we have to retrieve, we have to bring out our knowledge from our memories. And we're not allowed to look things up in our books. And we're asked to do that in silence. Well, that's because our teacher wants to help us secure our knowledge in our long-term memory. And that's because our teacher wants us to have to think really hard for ourselves. But it is hard. It's really hard to retrieve knowledge that you've very almost forgotten. And that's kind of the point. But it's not kind if we are going to be talking or creating any sort of distraction to our fellow students when we're being asked to do that. So I think it's listening, and silence, I think, is very much about respect, compassion, and kindness. And of course, that hard work that goes alongside it. So we're going to have a go. And we're going to do a little activity here whereby you're going to try it out. And you're going to be silent just for 1 minute. Often you'll be asked to be silent for much longer than that. But normally in a classroom environment, you would be having something to do. But we're going to do it a bit differently here. And what I'm actually asking of you is quite challenging. I'm not going to ask you to think about anything in particular. I'm not going to ask you to complete any sort of task or write anything down. I'm just going to ask your step tutor to set a timer and ask you to be silent for 1 minute. Now, it sounds really easy, but some of you will, I'm sure, find it quite hard. You'll find it quite uncomfortable. You'll probably be a bit fidgety. You might even feel like you're going to giggle, and then you'll worry, oh no, I'm going to giggle. But just stick with it, persevere, try hard. And hopefully towards the end of the minute, you'll really start to see the benefit of that silence. So let's just have a go. Okay, so hopefully your step tutors will be able to tell me. Hopefully you manage to be silent. So we know you can be silent, but can you listen? And that sounds really obvious. And some of you will be thinking, well, yeah, unless you've got some sort of hearing impediment, of course you can listen. But I think there's a difference between hearing and listening. So how do we know if someone is really listening? Maybe as a group, you could just gather some ideas together on the board. How do we know if someone is properly listening to what we say? And hopefully you came up with things about looking at the person when they're talking, leaning in and being able to ask them questions and actually know what they've said, so therefore being able to respond. Because I think there's a real difference between hearing and listening. And I think this often happens in schools. I heard it, but I didn't listen. And you'll know yourself if you've ever had a conversation with somebody and they've been distracted, maybe something's been on the TV in the background and they've been more interested in that. And you know, you're talking and they're like, yeah, and they may be nodding and saying yes, but they're not really saying yes in the right places. And they're not able to respond because they haven't really listened properly to what you've said, so they haven't processed it. It doesn't feel very nice, does it? It feels quite unpleasant because you think, well, why am I bothering talking? You're not interested. So there's that side of things about how it must feel if somebody's talking and we're not properly listening. But there's also the fact that we haven't taken in what they've said. And that's all very well in just a sort of conversation, social conversation. But in the classroom, everything that's said is really important. It's like really wonderful knowledge that we have to learn, or it's instructions on what we're about to be asked to do. So we have to make sure we're not just hearing, but we're really listening. And there's certain things we can do to help that. We can look at the person who's talking. Again, at the moment, we have to be careful. If we're sat very close to somebody, we don't really want to be leaning in and looking at them while talking, because that's not the safest thing to do in this current situation. But these are general rules as we move forwards and we move out of this situation. These are general rules for good listening. And certainly if our teacher is stood at the front of the room and we are listening to them, then absolutely there's enough distance there that we should be leaning in and we should be looking at them. And if they're moving, our eyes should be tracking them, because it doesn't feel nice if somebody's listening to you, but they're not looking at you. It doesn't feel nice at all. And we listen with intent. And I think that's really important. And we're going to do a little activity where we put that to the test now. So with the person who you are sat close to, one of you is person A, one of you is person B. Person A, you're going to do the listening, and person B, you're going to do the talking. And you're going to talk about how you feel about starting school, what you're looking forward to, what new things you're going to try, any anxieties, any worries that you have. So you're just going to talk for no more than 1 minute about your thoughts and feelings of starting school. And person A, you're going to listen. And you're going to listen with real intent. You're going to listen knowing that at the end of it, your tutor might ask you to answer questions about what you've just heard. Okay? So that's going to be really important that you can do that and that you can really concentrate on what they're saying. You might even want to jot something down, but you're listening with intent. Okay, have a go. And when you've had a go, swap over. So this time person A is talking and person B is listening. But let's imagine this time there's no pressure, there's no threat that that your tutor's going to ask you anything. You're not going to be expected to report back. Okay? Off you go. Now there might be a difference. There might be a difference in terms of how much attention you pay. There might be a difference in terms of when one person has said something, if you didn't quite understand what they meant, or they used a term or an example that didn't really make any sense to you, you might have just stopped and said, oh, what do you mean by that? Because you felt that pressure that you're going to have to report back. Whereas person B didn't have that same pressure. Now, that's what we mean when we talk about listening with intent. Really listen with that intention that you're going to take in this knowledge and you're going to understand it. And think about what you're hearing. And if you don't understand a word that's used or an example, then you ask questions. So you're actively listening. You're not just being passive. And that's the difference between properly hearing something, between properly listening and just hearing something. And it's going to be really important to us in our lessons. So as you move on into your lessons for next week, when you start going to all of your different subject lessons, I want you to remember that. I want you to remember a few things. I want you to remember how it feels when you're talking and somebody is not looking at you, their back is to you. I want you to remember how it feels when you know that someone's not really properly listening. I want you to remember how important it is that we can have and we can respect that silence, and how that is very much about showing compassion and kindness to others. And I therefore want you to apply that in all of your lessons. And it will make a massive difference, not just to how well you learn, but to how others in your class feel. And all of that applies not just to when the teacher is talking or explaining something, but also when your classmates are. So if somebody in the class is called upon to answer a question, turn and look at them, because they're talking and you're listening, and it's just polite and it's just courteous. Okay, so you'll probably see me again in other videos throughout this week. But what I would really ask you to do, Year 7, is just to think about some of those little activities you've done and some of that learning that you've experienced this morning. And when your teacher says, okay, so now we're going to complete this in silence, just remember some of those quotes and just remember how important that really is for you and everybody in your class. Okay, look forward to seeing you all soon.